But next to me, I have Yuval Roos, from a CEO from Digital Assets and the DAML smart contracting language. Kavita Gupta, teaching at Stanford and a managing venture partner at Catapult. And Rod Backstrom, former president and CEO of ICANN and author of a quite famous book called The Spider and the Starfish. That's it. There it is. And what I especially like about it is that he's looking for a sweet spot between centralized organizations and decentralized organizations. And yeah, that's a very interesting book. So have a look into that one. I saw multiple copies here. They're for the board. There are multiple copies here for the board, but in case you want any, let me know. So, or the highest bidder. So I would like to start. I mean, you can link in these people and find out they have amazing careers. But I would like to start by getting to know you a little bit better with a question. What do you really want to change in the world? And with that, I mean, what kind of fundamental change are you working on?
Thank you. So thank you everyone for being here. So personally, you know, I've been at this blockchain journey for a long time, and I know that you share some of this, is that a lot of people talk about how blockchain is going to change the world, but I actually think that what we can do is, by educating people about blockchain, is how do we change how humans interact with one another or businesses interact with one another. So what I'm more passionate about is finding new business model or new interaction models that use this technology to enable shared economies, stakeholder economies, circular economies. That to me is where I'm getting excited in this space.
Cool, thank you. How about you, Kavita?
Hi, first of all, GBBC and Sandra, thank you so much for having me and the whole panel. This has been one of the biggest everyone I know in blockchain has been talking about this, so big success at Davos, so congratulations. Now back to the question for Miss Universe, right? This is the question which they ask. On a serious note, I think my attraction to blockchain started because of cross-border payment system. I have lived in Africa and Middle East for a couple of years, have seen the problems at the grassroots level, have invested in some of the biggest fintech companies, including M-Pesa at a very early stage, with the aim that we can solve this problem. And we couldn't. Like, we were able to unbank, we were able to bank the unbanks with respect to peer-to-peer, but with respect to international transactions, till today, I think there are very few companies which can take the credit for doing this. Of course, BitPesa and Coins.ph they are doing amazing job in the space, but I think cross-border transactions still deserve a bit space. And the second thing is remittance problems. When you are already leaving your home, going somewhere else, trying to earn money to send it back to your parents, and only 30% to 50% actually reach, that's not something which we should live in the world for. So I think those two things really attracted me towards the blockchain solutions, and I'm very excited about the potential, and I really want to see a big movement happening there.
A big movement, yes.
So I've got a very non-techie answer for a pretty techie guy, and that is, I was in New York on 9/11, and I was watching the towers burn. I had 15 customers in those towers, different banks. Japanese banks, Dutch banks, American banks, investment banks, and I was just horrified to see this, and I wanted to help. I'm an action person, I'm a CEO, I like to go do things, and I realized I couldn't get there. They're going to shut the roads, everything, and I've never felt so much despair to think that people I knew and thousands of others were going to be dying, and very painful deaths. So I finally realized there's only one thing I can do, and that is drop my bags and take a moment of silence and send up all the good thoughts I could for those people. And I did that. And I had a very beautiful experience. And the most amazing, simple words came to me that have informed every day of my life since. And those words apply to all of us. But the last bit's maybe for me, but the first 4 lines are the words I heard so clearly as I took these moments of silence were, it's a small world. It's a fragile world. And no one is safe until everyone is safe. And you are called to serve the peace. And, the first part was easy. Small world, fragile world, we all know that. Okay, done, bought it. But no one's safe until everyone's safe? OMG. I mean, that's a heavy lift. But then you think about karma, you think about, if we're all connected, then of course that's true, but that's like heavy. And then you're called to serve the peace was an absolute insane shocker to me, because I've done a lot of work in philanthropy and environment and building tech companies, but never, ever, ever thought about doing anything for peace. And I kind of protested. And it was as if just a waterfall of love just poured all over me. So my life is committed to serving peace. That's it. There's nothing else. And I've been the luckiest guy in the world, because somehow I've been able to participate. This is like the 5th or 6th major technology upheaval where I get to play a global systems role in participating and helping to architect how it evolves. It happened in derivatives. It happened in risk management. It happened in the peace work, which the book came out of. It's happened in internet when I ran ICANN, and we restructured fair amounts of the internet. It happened in cybersecurity when I run the national program for the United States. So anyway, I worked for peace. Blockchain love. I was a crypto skeptic until 2015. In 2017, I got active in both crypto and blockchain, and I've been active ever since. Done a number of projects. Am involved in what's happening in national digital currencies, among other things. Anyway, so I'm excited, and I think this is, along with AI right now, and machine learning and quantum. It's one of the 3 really key pillars. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry.
We have another panelist who should join us.
Sanjay, thank you. Welcome.
I had this slot right here. Can you get through right here? Here's a seat here for you.
No.
It's 5:30 on my calendar. I apologize.
Is that a way of special entrance?
I don't know.
So you're early. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I'm very happy that we now have. We have a great scenery back here. The drums of ex Guns N' Roses drummer. So we now have our rockstar panel complete. And Sanjay Poonen, VMware's COO. Thank you very much for joining us right in time for basically my opening question. Sanjay was. What in the world are you changing from a fundamental way?
Yeah, I think one of the things that all of us in technology type companies look to do is try to build innovation that's reasonably. We use this word disruptive, and it's not because we're trying to disrupt things, but have something that's well above the status quo. And I think it's a beautiful thing when you can do innovation that's disruptive, but also change society and help humanity. And the fundamental premise of what VMware is based on is this principle of virtualization. In fact, the VM in VMware stands for virtual machines and virtualization. And it was a concept invented by a wife and husband team for Intel architectures at Stanford, 20 years ago. And at the core of it, what it did was allowed you to save a lot of money and save a lot of energy in data centers. In the early days, we would have customers come back and show us or send us letters with their electricity bills before and after VMware and show that there was an 80% reduction in electricity. We did a study at our 20-year anniversary and estimated that over the lifetime of our customers, we had saved energy commensurate with what 40% of the U.S. homes use in a year. So there's very few enterprise, B2B companies that have had such an incredible impact on sustainability in terms of energy. So we live that in terms of making this a real important principle by which we've saved energy and seek to save energy again and again and again. And then, within our own company, we try to live by several sustainability types of values that we'll talk about, I'm sure, in the panel. But that's the impact VMware has sought to have to the community and to customers.
Yeah, and it's interesting. This is already a couple of years. We hear from our clients as well that they employ full-time employees that work on decarbonizing the IT stack. So not just decarbonizing the company, but specifically the IT stack. So that's a really, really interesting trend there. So I want to connect everyone's personal passion, basically, towards the topic we are going to debate and discuss. How can we outcompete destructive systems? And what are destructive systems even? It's with VMware and Digital Assets and Demo, we have a track at the Odyssey Open Innovation Program. And this is more like what we are trying to change in the world is how humans collaborate to unlock their potential, to get towards very, very different outcomes. And it turned out that when you get to know the internet, when you get to know crypto as well as blockchain, then everything boils down to collaboration. So we are at the moment not just going through a tech revolution, but we believe we're also going through a human revolution that completely redefines the way we collaborate. So that's what gets us going, and that's at the heart of the Odyssey program, where we are an incubator for ecosystems that solve complex challenges through mass collaboration, right? Because lots of the complex challenges out there cannot be solved by one organization and are bigger than industries and countries. So we seek to find new ways of mass collaboration and provide them with an infrastructure. So to do that, part of the program is a hackathon. But when I say hackathon, you will get something in your mind, and it's probably quite different than what we do. So I want to take you back towards last year, where Sandra also was there. That's actually the reason why we're here. Thank you, Sandra. To just get on the same page of what we are talking about here, and then also it's the inspiration for the topic of outcompeting destructive systems. And you will know within 2 minutes why that is. So can we have the video, please?
Odyssey 2019. 1,500 people are working really together and collaborating. That's for sure a start of a transformation.
We are not optimizing the status quo, but really finding new ways to organize our society in a much better way.
The idea is that this rover is able to collect data about the forest. So for example, soil conditions, biodiversity, to give the forest some type of self-awareness.
We're building a disaster recovery system, which essentially is a backup form of internet that activates when all of their systems go down.
So we're trying to modernize fundamentally how we do government. It's a really big challenge.
People learn from us how we look at those business propositions, and we learn from them. Well, we bring all the information back to the organization, and then we hope we can better supervise. So it's also for better quality supervision.
The energy, the number of people, the amount of help we get from the Jedis and from the organization and everything, it's something else.
The scale is just nuts. How many teams? This variety is just incredible.
And people are thinking up every year again at the second one in really big new things, and I think we're getting closer and closer to having the technology at the level that this is really scalable.
So we have to outcompete the destructive systems in developing sustainable systems that are more profitable and are better for nature and people.
So that is my friend Willy Smits. You know what's on his card? I mean, you all have amazing jobs, but he is a rainforest engineer, right? So he wanted to save, 40 years ago, the orangutans on Borneo. And then he found out, of course, he had to save the forests because they were being turned into monocultures to get the palm oil. And then he discovered that he had to think of a way to provide an option for people that don't have an option to make a different decision, which means do not longer grow palm oil, but leverage the biodiversity. So 40 years in the making, he has created a model which indeed leverages the biodiversity, brings back the orangutans, and is 4 times more profitable than palm oil. So it allows the villages to easily, no-brainer, change from a palm oil scheme towards this scheme, basically. And now they're doing a $400 million project of 500,000 hectares in reforestation on Borneo. And how that ties into the hackathon is that the runner-up in his track is now providing the infrastructure to capture all the space data and drone data and put that in all kinds of feedback loops for all stakeholders. So that's the thing we're talking about, and that's quite a big contract there. It's clients, it's business, it's a new market, and other companies can now build on that infrastructure too. So that is what we're talking about when we're looking at the challenges we're doing with VMware and digital assets in terms of how can we decarbonize the economy and incentivize consumers and organizations in there, and how can we get rid of all the plastic waste and material. So that's just to shape a little bit of the context here and the story we're bringing with this conversation. So my next question to you all is, when we look at destructive systems and we look at the grander scheme of things, you could say that we live in a time frame, so to say, where we can see some of the old systems that emerged in the past century. They are kind of getting shaky. You could even say they are dying. And new systems are emerging like sprouts through concrete. And we don't know yet what will come of them, but you can see them emerging. So I have a question. So how do you recognize this? How do you recognize the symptoms of destructive or dying systems? And can we relate them to, or can we leave them behind and see also the emergent symptoms of these new kind of systems that try to solve what the old ones have broken down? So anyone who would like to start commenting on that?
Sure, I can start. So one of the most exciting projects that we're working on is actually together with VMware in Australia, where we are putting the entire Australian equity market on a blockchain. And you can imagine that a recent study have shown that the cost to the Australian market to run their equity market is $20 billion. And ASX takes about 130 million of it, and the rest goes to other participants in the market. So you can imagine that when a company like VMware is coming to put that infrastructure, people know that it will work, but people are starting to get worried. What does it mean for us? How does our business change? Where does the $20 billion goes to? How low is it going to go? And you have a destructive system because that system is inefficient. And you know, one of the things that in order to be successful by creating this kind of transformation is, first of all, understand the impact of what you're doing and understand who are the players in that destructive system. Why are they being destructive? What are the opportunities for them maybe to actually join the journey with you and not be destructive anymore and actually add value? And this is kind of what I was saying earlier on, that where my passion is a lot of people keep on, you know, we had a joke at my company in the early days is just put a blockchain on it, right? It will just fix all the problems. Where I think that one of the key things with this technology is really think about it like you are going to change a system that a lot of time is either inefficient, destructive, and you're going to create something new. So my recommendation all the time when I talk to companies in this space is understand the stakeholders. This is a distributed system. There are multiple participants. There are those that are going to get hurt. There are those that are going to get benefit. And once you have an appreciation for that, I think that you can get much more behind you, bring people to the journey, and actually sell on this idea rather than scare people.
I think the way I look at it, it's just change is the way things are going to be always. Whether you catch up with it or you don't catch up with it. Like, I started my digital journey with Hotmail and AOL, and which does not exist anymore. And a lot of things, like the companies when I was young, dreamt of working with, didn't even exist by the time I graduated from college. And that will continue to happen with the companies which today, if they don't catch up on what's the next technology. And apart from the companies, it's also the segments. One of the things, how people have used blockchain into different space. Of course, fintech is one of the most talked about case, but like even in supply chain, yes, there's a transparency, and yes, people from the business side talk about it helps them reduce costs, but there is another use case which has been used by, I think they have done a pilot project, not at the scale, is Pepsi to also see the water conservation and map the water conservation and have the very quantifiable and the transparent result of how much water from which areas they are using to actually make the product, so that people just cannot come and say, hey, this particular village or area already did not have a water supply, and how much they are reusing it. And the second very amazing thing is their partnership with the Nobel Peace Laureate, Mr. Kailash Satyarthi, to also map and say everyone who's working on the whole supply chain, what are the minimum wages they are getting? Are they meeting the minimum wage? So as a buyer, I have more information to make my choices, And I think everybody see the use case of any technology the way it really touches them. And I'm seeing a lot of changes happening. And with these changes, other people either have to follow the suit, or the customer's going to decide which direction the business is going to go.
So, few thoughts, go a lot of directions with this. So, when you look at the book that we wrote, The Starfish and the Spider, The Unstoppable Power of Leaderless Organizations, it's really about two disparate models of organizations. Spiders, if you cut the head off, they die. It's because they're centralized. So without a central nervous system, they die, and that represents traditional hierarchical organizations. And starfish, on the other hand, if you cut an arm off, it can regrow. And in some species, if you cut all 5 arms off, guess what happens? You get 5 new starfish. That's how decentralized they are. They're an animal that reproduces by getting cut apart. But the working title of the book, by the way, when we sold it, was The Decentralized Revolution. And it was too early. They're like, what is a decentralized revolution? What are you talking about? We're like, well, everything's going to go decentralized because the internet's decentralized, and all these human organizations are changing, using it to be in new forms that are more flat and more fluid. So that's kind of the framework I think through. And then as an economist, I'm an economist by training that's done technology pretty much the whole time since I've graduated in different problems. As an economist, Schumpeter had the statement, I think, creative destruction, right? Which economies go through. So you think about blockchain. So I look at blockchain. At one level, I just say, okay, it's just a new database. And it just has different properties, okay? In terms of how it's stored, in terms of how it's computed, in terms of how the users engage with it, in terms of the fact that it's immutable. You can't change it. It's very extremely hard to go back and change. So then you think about, what are you going to use that for? Well, you're probably not going to use it to pull every pixel out of a screen image and live video and store each piece in a separate, transaction in a blockchain. That'd be insane, be wasteful. But you probably do want to use it in finance, where like the problems you're working on, where back-end settlements are just so insanely inefficient because so many parties are representing the same data and reconciling and connecting, and it's just a huge waste in the system. So I believe blockchain is, probably, I guess, the most important database innovation since object-oriented databases, which were the biggest before, since relational. I actually built an inferential database company that came out of comp sci at Stanford that we sold. But so there's a whole bunch of areas that'll be applied to. But I want to challenge this industry and say, well, here's something we need to destruct: proof of work. Proof of work is horribly inefficient, bad for the environment. Just happens to be fair. Happens to work pretty well and be quite stable. And you can do that. It's easier to do in private networks. Yuval could probably tell us a lot about that. But in terms of Bitcoin and some of the open platforms, and all I'm saying here, and when we have those structures, they're hard to evolve because people are invested in it. So the same is true throughout society. And I think what we want to think about in blockchain, or the entrepreneurs are doing anyway, And what GBBC can do is try to create good standards and a good environment, and like the processes you guys are developing, to develop that, drive that evolution, like moving your stuff onto VMware, which is a great platform, runs all over the world, you know, with tremendous efficiency. I won't talk about containers, I'll be polite. Of course you do. But anyway, so the cycle of creativity will go on. I think it's just an incredibly exciting time in history, and we're all lucky to be a part of it.
I'll just be brief because I agree with all of my esteemed colleagues here. I think just a couple of principles I would lay out that are good for those of us who are leaders to think about. One is you always want to be thinking about if you're building a company, you're building an organization, you're building a business, what can you do to dissolve yourself, so to speak? Like, or who's going to dissolve you? And when you go back from first principles, I'll just take the comment you just made. The thing that will completely wreck VMware is containers, okay? So what do? You embrace it. If you don't, it's going to disrupt you. And I think that principle applies whether it's a destructive system or a disruptive system, okay? Destructive or disruptive, either one. So in the early days of a word processor, let's take that way back when the word processor came. If you basically, I'm not saying there were people doing this, but let's say your living was you could hand check, spell check. You were the best at reading and detecting. And here comes a machine able to do that better. I mean, yeah, you're going to be threatened, but think about how our life has been transformed through spell check, through automation of those things, and everybody has now got higher level jobs or higher level tasks where people are being more creative. People are writing books and not having to look for publishers. So I think the principle really that I would, and this is not just business. I tell organizations too. You see a lot of organizations that are started by a founder who is a sort of almost a cultistic leader, and then after that founder dies, it just dissolves. Because there's nobody else who has that sort of passion to take it to the next level. So whether you're running a business, leading an organization, leading a school, you always ask yourself, what's going to disrupt me or us? And then work to embrace that. And if you do that, I think you can actually take advantage of these, either destructive or disruptive forces to you.
So in that transformation that we're talking about, where do you see the biggest business value being created, let's say in the next 3 years, when we are kind of exploring these systems in the making, but at the same time trying them out?
I'll start, I hope. If I look at the big problems that I think our society needs to solve, and this goes well beyond, VMware is a good technology, but I think there's some fundamental healthcare that I hope is solved in the next 10 years. If you look back in the 1990s, the fundamental healthcare innovation was probably HIV. It allowed athletes like Magic Johnson to now live their full life. He was able to play in the Olympics. People had a misconception of HIV, and now we more or less solved that. Just like maybe years ago we solved leprosy and things of that kind. But listen, we're still dealing with some very horrible diseases: Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, internal cancer, which is just hard to detect till you get to stage 3, stage 4. And these are, I believe, at the core of it, big data, AI, DNA sequencing type of problems. And I hope if we're looking back and doing the same panel, I won't be here, somebody else will be 10 years from now, okay, that we've solved that. And that's the use of this technology platforms to make a breakthrough in 10 years. Now, when I ask doctors, I'm not a doctor, but I know a number of folks are, they're still skeptical, but I hope that that's what happens in 2030, right? Where we take these fundamental technologies that are being used today for some good use cases like driverless car and so on, but applied to healthcare, I think we'll get, real key change in society.
Yeah. And you want to comment?
Yeah, and actually, I think that the technology that we're using could actually help specifically the U.S. healthcare system significantly, which is a big mess of multiple parties that are, operating in a very inefficient manner between each other.
Well, from Europe, it's an interesting site, but I think there's a lot to gain if we collaborate, because we have a lot of data to share. I think if you look at protocols that are being created in Europe, for example, the Ocean Protocol, that would unlock massive data pools, for example, of biobanks, where we do the hackathon in Groningen. We have a biobank of 60 years already with 160,000 people. There are multiple of these biobanks, and what you can do with them if you create, let's say, data ecosystems that might even run public AI networks in asking those kind of questions and using them to lower the cost, that could help tremendously. So I think there's also a major opportunity for European companies and US companies, as well as Asian companies and African companies, by the way, to collaborate and see what they can learn from each other. When we look at what we are specifically tackling in the upcoming Odyssey, we look at plastics and the waste it generates in supply chains, as well as the carbonization, or let's say, how can we decarbonize the economy? And basically, what I appreciate about that is that we use the technology to look at new things, or let's say, how can we start accounting for the things we don't count yet, but that really count, you know? So where do you see business opportunities rising in that kind of area? Do you foresee new kind of market opportunities?
Sure, I'm happy. This Monday I attended a session by the government of Indonesia. So there are three major countries that are responsible for decarbonation using green forests or plants. One of them is Brazil, and we know which direction that country is going, unfortunately. Then there's Congo, that not a lot is happening there. And then there's Indonesia that is actually putting quite significant effort to solve some of these problems. And what is interesting about what Indonesia is doing is, again, this idea, how do you convince poor people to actually not cut trees and then go and sell them, or how to reduce plastics. Indonesia is a dumping ground for a lot of plastic of Southeast Asia. So a lot of the initiatives that I actually heard about there, and I'm actually aware that are taking place, is creating new businesses that actually encourage this circular or stakeholder economies, where the stakeholders are the people that you try to create this change in behavior, are participating and are actually gaining. So there are opportunities for us, the technology providers, to actually create this kind of infrastructure, but there's also opportunities for the people that are participating to gain from it.
And if you look at the role of different parts of the technology, and the role of big enterprises in that space, as well as all the participants that could be in there, like the civilians or the customers, so to say, then you also talk about a balance between centralized and decentralized, and that all these systems collaborate with each other or interact with each other. Rod, is that something you recognize? Because you were looking for the sweet spot, and I see Kavita already eager to jump in, so...
Not jump in, I was just smiling, because I find this decentralized world least collaborative.
Aha, that's interesting.
Tezos, can I say the word Tezos?
I'm not saying any word, but...
Well,
I know, bad example.
You're talking about maximalism here a little bit, perhaps?
No,
or?
I think, I believe that, generally from my observation and my personal observation, and I see a lot of people agreeing to me in a different way, sitting in the crowd, is that I just feel like we are talking, we in the industry talk about decentralization, like not an individual having a control. We talk about collaborativeness. We want government to be more open. We want big companies and big data companies to be more open and have control in the people, control to the people. Mm-hmm. And then I see the most non-collaborative business decisions by the community. Mm-hmm. So I think what we need to, we need to start preaching our own community first. And I'm talking about the whole blockchain community, whatever blockchain you believe in, whatever coin you believe in. I just feel like we need to first go and walk the road we want to preach and be more collaborative with each other to actually offer the solution to the world which asks for collaborativeness, not just being ordered for collaborativeness.
So Yeah, okay, you want to comment on that?
I don't disagree, and I would say we have a great collaborator here, and I think what Sanjay said, to be honest, really hit well, because about a year ago, what I've been thinking about is what is going to take us out of business. And we start seeing companies like VMware entering the space, and Microsoft is entering the space, and we start thinking, well, when it comes to blockchain, it's economies of scale. And we, as a startup with just over 100 people, do not have economies of scale. So actually, we start thinking, well, how can we collaborate with those? But listen, I think that you're spot on. I think that if we are an industry that want to drive collaborative.
So you believe.
No. Well, factually, you're correct, okay. But I believe that it has to change because, again, it's no different. A lot of the topics that came up here in Davos is diversity and inclusion, and one of the first things that they say is you want to have diversity and inclusion. If you don't practice it, then it's all fake, and it's never gonna get. It will never succeed. So I also believe in what you're saying.
Yeah, and Kavita, I think that some of the criticism is justified. I mean, that some things, in some areas, collaboration aren't working that well, and I guess I hit a third rail. I'm good at that sometimes. But a lot is good. And so actually, go back to the proof of work. Proof of work is a great model that has worked. If you put aside the environmental effect, led to incredible collaboration, unprecedented, and the creation of entire new currencies and economies. And what's happened on the on Ethereum as well, it's phenomenal. So I give very high collaboration points to that. And then it can break down to the micro level. It's hard. Collaboration's hard. The trade-offs are hard. You end up having economic stakes and issues you got to work out. But I want to answer the global warming question for a moment because it's a topic I really am passionate about and have been for a long, long time. And I think there's a huge role that blockchain can play in global warming. So there's 2 points I'm going to make. The first is, to succeed in global warming, we've got to have better data. Here's the great news most of the world doesn't know about. There's a satellite being launched next year called MethaneSat. We raised $70 million to put a new satellite, the first satellite in orbit, or I think the first, that only does environmental monitoring, specifically methane gas, down to the block level. If 3 people in a block, square block, leave their barbecues on without it lit, you'll be able to see it. It's point sourced. And here's the great collaboration story. All the big oil companies have already agreed to cap the methane and stop the leaks if they're just shown the data. And they're over 30% of the methane. Methane is 30% of all greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases are stable, actually. We're warming the planet because we're still growing the level because it's unsustainable. We're creating more than we absorb, than the forests absorb. But the level's stable. Here's Rod's prediction. Within 10 years, aggregate greenhouse gases will drop by 10% alone because of this one satellite. Alone, at almost no cost to society, because the oil companies can mitigate. That's the first part of it. Second part, what do we really need? I'm an economist by training, I mentioned that. I was part of the Kyoto Protocol effort. I was on the board of one of the 2 organizations that drafted it. And it's a fantastic model. It's just America never ratified it, and because we didn't, it didn't become globally enforceable. But when it becomes enforceable, we've got to do it in one form or another. You're going to have carbon credits. Where should those carbon credits be stored and tracked? In my view, blockchain. Best database in the world for it. So I actually think there's a huge role blockchain can play. And there's many other niches too, but anyway.
So you envision that as a consumer you would have a carbon credit line, something like that?
Well, the way the Kyoto Protocol worked is it allocated it mostly to industry and government. So the government's had a responsibility. So the way cap and trade works is you have to measure all the gases coming out of a system first. And then you have to say, so let's say, I forget what's the aggregate global number now? It's 30 billion tons, I don't even know. But whatever the number is, you cap it and say it can't grow, and now it's got to start coming down at these increments over these years. And it's allocated by country, but you don't say how it's reduced. You allocate it to the industries according to what they're consuming today. So if you're running a coal-fired plant that generates 1 million tons of CO2, you get allocated 1 million today and it starts going down. And then you either mitigate or you can buy the credits from somewhere else. And it's that marketplace for credits that drives it down. And the quick success story is we had acid rain in the US. Who remembers acid rain? And the trees, the forests being lost. Who hears about it now? Solved. Clean Air Act in 1992.
That's not True.
Well, I'm very happy to have
Please go to Kenya. Please come to Delhi, my hometown.
okay,
That's so
in the
nice.
United States of America, where the Clean Act, where the clean, so,
Different cloud. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Anyway,
That's
it
good.
worked. It has been. We've dropped it 95%. The assets.
So I think the opportunity that the teams are going to explore in the Odyssey track is how to include the consumer in the market you are mentioning. Because if I'm in the supermarket and I see product A that in the Netherlands that has been flown from, I don't know, Argentina, or it's from Germany, then and the price is the same, what incentivizes me to make the right decision, right? So
Well, when you got to pay the tax or effective carbon credits on the fossil fuels you purchase is how it goes in the system.
that is going to be interesting, right?
Yeah, and it can go down to the consumer level.
Yeah. So and if you talk about the role of infrastructure for these kind of ecosystems, where do you see the developments going, Sanjay? Because you're an infrastructure player.
Yeah, no, just let me cover one thing that Kavita talked about just briefly. I think it's an astute point. Listen, the culture is always is evolved between command and control and collaboration. And decentralized organization, you might think are more collaborative, but the human tendency is competitiveness, and command and control is just in all of our blood, so it kind of comes back in. And in organizations, we always have to have this yin and yang that I mean, listen, too much collaboration, decentralization is not good because you get enormous amount of chaos. There was a couple of companies that basically moved away from a command and control scheme to completely collaborative councils. And they spent their entire time going from meeting to meeting. They tried to get everybody to collaborate. And finally, people would say, would someone just make a damn decision? Because I'm sick and tired of having to get everybody to agree. So I think these are always going to be yin and yang to operating models of how companies. But coming back now to your question, I mean, there are principles by which we work. It's far be it from me to predict how things would work. If you had asked me in 1997 when I was graduating from graduate schools, could you predict the future of cloud computing? No way. Several of my friends went to Amazon to do retail things, okay? One of them was a close friend of mine. His name is Andy Jassy, started AWS. But his idea of AWS happened much later. It's become now one of the leading infrastructure. He was my classmate, but I said, listen, 97, did you have the idea of cloud? No, not at all. But the principle really is this, which is, listen, at the end of the day, people don't want to pay for a lot of expensive labor if it can be automated, right? And a lot of what was happening in infrastructure was you would put some hardware in, some software, and then pay a lot of consultants to maintain this, and then outsource it and pay more, and it was getting really expensive, and you just weren't able to innovate. And someone said, why don't I do that for you? Why? Because in the case of Amazon, they were doing it for their own retail operation, and they said, why don't we take what we're doing for our own retail operation and now offer that to others? So I think, listen, at the end of the day, what we as infrastructure companies have to do are ruthlessly look at ways by which we can take what we call the total cost of ownership down, which is a combination of often hardware, software, and labor. And, you know, we'll work with economists like you who help us say, listen, this is the way in which you measure it. And then you ruthlessly ask yourself, how do you do it? And as you do that, you're going to disrupt certain players. So who got disrupted by the move to cloud computing? Probably a lot of system integrators and outsourcers. They've got to embrace the new paradigm or else they're extinct, right? So those are some fundamental principles by which infrastructure companies, like if you're going to survive, you apply those types of principles and then you evolve. Every 10 years, something new is going to show up.
It's very interesting. Sorry, I just want to add what you said. Around a year and a half back, I met some hardware, very, very big hardware production company out of Asia. And they said because of all the cloud computing, now we are using hardware for all the mining for blockchain and crypto. And they just figured out a new market.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. So coming to the end of our conversation, when startups are moving into this space and investors are moving into this space, what would you say is we're talking about adoption here, because that's of course when there's adoption, then you hit a curve there, because the infrastructure is partially decentralized. It's very inclusive. You look at how to enable new players to connect, to contribute, and to benefit. Even if you're a consumer, I mean, we can learn that from any ecosystem where, for example, in an app store, any consumer is turned into a producer. So in this space, when we look at adoption of, like, let's say, protocols, new protocols that allow for new levels of collaboration, are there some fundamental or substantial requirements, you would say, that are really important for adoption once you get through that first cases where you've proven that a certain model could work? Because in the end, there are a lot of good initiatives also in getting rid of plastics, and the thing is that they are not really connected with each other. So in this effort, we are looking to interconnect all the good initiatives out there, because then you hit the multiplier, right? So in terms of adoption and guidance on that, do you have any comments?
I'll just start very quickly. I mean, would build a little bit on kind of the way I'm sure you're thinking about the digital asset. I advise startups, what we would be seeking to see if he came to me and said, is the experience that we're noticing with the first stock exchange something that's replicable to more, or is this a one-off? Because everyone will have a beta customer that you're going to work with. And the worst thing you could do is build something that just appears like it's a nuclear plant, which you can only do once, right? That's a great business idea, but you only do it once. And that's not scalable. So the more that we get a sense as you incubate something in the early prototyping that what you're seeing is a repeatable phenomenon without a lot of customization. I mean, the reason Microsoft became the biggest software company and the biggest market cap company, they figured out that everybody on a PC needed this thing called Windows. And then it was just get more and more CDs out.
And then we got Clippy, the paper clip who helped us.
Even if it doesn't have to be as big an idea, the key is in that early stage of innovation is to find that product market fit that's repeatable. Then you know you're onto something, right? And I encourage investors, don't go raising money and trying to do all that stuff. You're just going to dilute yourself. Find a couple of beta customers and solve that well before you start the effort to go to venture capitalists to raise money. Because often people just think that they have created something that's valued a lot if they raise money at a valuation X. That doesn't matter. If you've got a repeatable use case that could happen with early customers that you can scale quickly, you're onto something.
Thank you very much for that one.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think I'll just add on it, but like in my personal experience, there are certain companies where you need an initial investment capital for them to even go and get customers. So from my own portfolio example, like BlockFi, we invested in them when it was just a deck. It was just a presentation. Because the reason is it was a crypto lending platform. They needed the balance sheet to start doing something on top of it. But the other fintech company, which is Neo, we went in when they already had around 18,000 customers, because their platform was an online crypto hedging company. So people can just doing their own buying and selling, and they were just providing the technology. So I think it depends upon project to project. But in both cases, one thing was common, which is very similar to what he said, is the founders were very clear that they're going to take it to this level, and then they need to have a partnership to actually validate that this is scalable. And then it makes sense for them to do a big Series A round instead of multiple seed, post-seed rounds.
So my advice, and it's especially for this space, is that the wave of funding for just saying you're a crypto or a blockchain company is, I wouldn't say over, but it's more challenging. And because of that, I think that when you are entering this space, and you asked about adoption, to me adoption means, similar to what Sanjay said, is do you actually have a market here? Just because blockchain can enable real-time settlement, it doesn't mean that there is a market for real-time settlement. And those who came from markets would understand why real-time settlement will not fly. Sandra is laughing, she came from CME. Other people will understand this thing called market makers, liquidity, things like that matters, will not allow that to happen. So to me, the most important thing is you get excited about a technology, that's awesome. But really think about what is the market that you're trying to create, and actually verify that product market fit. Does it really exist? And then go to your investor and say, I need money.
Yeah, and I'd say, echoing what Sanjay said, and Yuval and Kavita as well, you got to add real value. So the bottom line is, if you're an entrepreneur, you better figure out, how am I really going to add value? And don't believe your own hype. I mean, crypto, like the internet, when the internet exploded, and you and I were around for that boom, some of the others weren't, but hype was really selling in 1999 and 2000. Anything was selling and was going to the sky, and it kind of was happening in crypto land in 2017, right? So the notion was, create a utility token, and the whole world will reorganize around that token, and it'll be beautiful. But there really wasn't sound economic analysis around it, a lot of that. But we have the survivor of the cryptocurrencies themselves that are an effective way of storing value and transferring value for some part of the economy and players that really want to have it. Working so well that now China, the largest country in the world, is going to do their currency on it, which is something I encourage them to do, by the way. So that's a working model. Then when you come to the new businesses, blockchain is so real. I mean, it's working in financial settlements already in different cases early on, can do a lot more in payments, is doing a lot in source tracing on products. And so I think there can be explosion of innovative small companies, but it's like add value. How are you going to really add value to the customer? And consider what blockchain is and isn't to make sure it really fits the business model.
Yeah, great. Thank you all. Want to wrap up. I think the last remarks about finding a product market fit really hit the spot for us, because that's exactly what we do right there at the moment of inception and even the prototype, because you have the clients at the same side of the table when you create the prototype. So the program basically prepares all the clients and their stakeholders to create with the teams and then later on adopt the product. So that would be a good fit, I would say. I want to really appreciate that we have found a partnership with VMware and Digital Assets for exploring a future that no one really can know how it will play out, but certain principles are certainly aligning and give great guidance. And it all starts with, for example, where we started, that you want to use the technology as well as the company as a force that creates value, as a force for good. And that's where people really align, that's where trust is built, and that's what blockchain is all about. So the exploratory efforts we don't do alone. We invite anyone that wants to contribute and it wants to also benefit from that collaboration, whether that are the teams. We opened the team applications on January 20th here in Davos. They are open until 24th of February. The teams are very diverse. I mean, there are corporate teams from, let's say, Deloitte, Accenture, or CGI, or whatever, but also well-funded startups, pre-startups, and some of the best student teams in the world. So it's really, really diverse. 105 teams in total, of which 10 will be in the track of outcompeting destructive systems. But also, of course, plastics users, manufacturers, all these kind of stakeholders are very welcome to onboard. Thank you all, dear panel members. Thank you, Sandra and GBBC, for having us, and thank you, audience, for being with us, and look forward to connect with you later.